What's your take on how the DJ started to become, if you like, more musical and became more of a musician and indeed now a performer?
If you go back to, almost like days of disco, DJs were entertainers. They either ran the club or they were entertainers. They played other people's music. Eventually, they started re-editing people's music and reinterpreting it in different ways. If you think back to like this New York DJs like Chet Pettibone and like all those end of disco stuff, 80s kind of thing. And then from after the rave scene, and then as the kind of the clubs what were referred to later as the super clubs started, then you started having these DJ personalities grow and grow. And I think then you could look at every case and say that they evolved slightly differently. Probably Paul Oakenfold, Sasha were two that kind of got it quite quickly, that if we started making music, we would be perceived in a different way. And they probably weren't even that, well, maybe Paul was probably maybe a little bit more calculated about it than Sasha was. I think Sasha was just an artist, and he kind of already had this very unusual mixing style where everything was in key, everything was perfect. He was people knew with him that something different was going on here, and he probably could make quite a good record. Eventually signed to Deconstruction and made some pretty seminal records for the time. And so although people would always assume he was a DJ, to think of him as a DJ, he got an enormous amount of respect for the music he made. Oki went a slightly different route of attempting to have big hits. He was already a massive DJ. He'd already kind of started a seminal club with Spectrum. Did the Ibiza trip that's well documented, and then started doing big remixes, remixing U2. It doesn't get much bigger, especially back then, in early 90s, remixing U2 was a massive thing. And he did a really good remix, and then he used all those relationships to kind of put himself in a place where, he started making records that kind of took over his act, really. And I think with Paul, you probably saw a transformation through the 90s of he started playing less and less of other people's music, more and more of his own, and then to a point where he kind of worked out that I could actually, because he actually went on tour with U2, and he always quotes that McGuinness and Bono were big influences on him, and he was just like a sponge. I mean, obviously he couldn't reproduce to U2, but he could act in his own way. He said, well, I can instead of being hired, I'll hire the room, and I'll play my own hits. And he got away with it, and he more than got away with it. And then he thought, actually, I'm also going to leave the country at my most popular, when everyone wants to book me, and I'm most powerful. I'm going to actually leave and go and move to America, and then I'm going to go and do the same, lift up exactly the same model, and plonk it down. And he thought about this. He think by touring in America, and by working, like all the things we used to preach to a band, like every small town, do it for no money, just keep doing. He churned around America for a few years, and lo and behold, he became the first superstar DJ in America. And he ended up playing arenas, performing his own music, and that's I suppose that probably was the start of it. Every year that there's a Tiesto or a Deadmau5 who looks a little bit more like a DJ. Well, all right, Deadmau5 is stuck in between. You'll always have your James Murphys, your LCD Sound Systems, your Hot Chips, your Chemical Brothers, your Underworld, your Orbitals. There'll be people obviously that will come along that just really do look a bit more like a band than a DJ. But in terms of DJs making music, that was the start of it, really. And if you think of any of the new wave, who are the hottest DJs in the world right now? Who's going to be hot in Ibiza this year? Luciano, Ricardo Villalobos, on Deadmau5 is going to have a great year this year. The Swedish House Mafia. I mean, most of those names I just mentioned, they really are DJs, but they all make music, and they all kind of really got their kick up the arse by making music as opposed to DJing.
Let's start talking about Deadmau5, because I think you spotted that quite early as being something that's different and new.
Yeah.
In a world where I think from the outside you don't often get a sense of much change. It's a sort of thing that just keeps moving along, but obviously from within it there's changes going on. So in what way was Deadmau5 a new addition to this particular scene?
I always think of Deadmau5 as the first kind of internet created electronic dance music superstar. I think he you know, the whole dance scene kind of collapsed as an industry around 2000, 2001. You kind of had this huge infrastructure around dance music. Every major label had a dance department, loads of staff, loads of magazines, loads of clubs, and by 2000, 2001, the scene had run out of steam a little bit, and it couldn't sustain this this business model. So as soon as kind of Napster started and people started sending files around for free, the first bit of the music business to really suffer was the dance music business. It was the easiest thing to cut. So all the labels shut down. A lot of the magazines collapsed because there was no ad revenue. A lot of the clubs closed down because it just wasn't as hip and happening as it was in 1989, 1991, and the whole business has had to reinvent itself. But it was the first real adapter to the internet and what it meant. The internet meant that, you know, if you made a cool tune and you lived in Toronto like deadmau5 does, and you sent it to Pete Tong in London, or you sent it to your mate in Brazil, you know, you could get a booking quite quickly.
Yeah.
So this migration of DJs and music started kind of traveling around the world. You know, roll forward a few years, and you know, we started to work out our own method of distribution. That although you couldn't get the kind of $100,000 check from the record company anymore, you could actually get your music out there via MySpace, via, you know, other websites, via and then eventually via Beatport, which was the kind of first specialist record store, or the first successful specialist record store to go online. And it's kind of the ultimate long tail business. It sells millions and millions of items, but sells only like 50 copies of each one.
Yeah.
And deadmau5 was right there when this started to happen, and he started to send records to Beatport. They started to you know, put his records on the front of their site, and he grew a kind of notoriety on the web by just pressing people's buttons. You know, he just knew how to kind of make people take notice of him. He had a great name. Everyone called him deadmau5, including me, for the first year, which he didn't know anything about. He just sat there going, "You're all tossers." Yeah. Yeah. And he built up a relationship with me online, contacting me, and he just reached out to people, and you know, after a year, he was kind of, everybody knew about him, and everybody knew about his music. He hadn't really had a hit, but he was starting to make a lot of noise. And then he started to appear live, and you know, he had the whole thing with the mouse head and everything like that. And he brilliantly used all the mediums available. You could write a kind of thesis about how he did it, really. Yeah, that's kind of his story, and he it's a fascinating one. He really is. You know, he's headlining festivals, and he's got big records on the underground. But as I say, he hasn't really had a hit that everyone can sing in the shower yet. So what's interesting times.
What is the difference then? What is about that it could only happen now? That
if you're a DJ in the early '90s and you wanted to make a record, then firstly, the first barrier was you'd have to go and find a studio to make it, and that cost money, and not everyone has the money to do that. You probably didn't know how to do it anyway. You probably just had a few great ideas. I mean, Dave Durrell's really one of my closest friends. When you think of Pump Up the Volume, Mars, it was him and CJ McIntosh, who was his DJ mate, and that other guy who actually knew how to run everything in the studio. And that's how you had to do it. Yeah. And then your access to the market was completely controlled by the record companies. So even if you've made the tune, you have to find a record company to go and sign it, and then hopefully make it enough of a priority to distribute it in the right way and get it out there. That's just not the case now. You can make a record at home. You can buy the software. You can make a pretty good record at home if you're talented, smart enough to work it all out, and you can actually now distribute the thing yourself. You know, your access to the public is a lot easier now. What we're in a world then when suddenly as the audience, it suddenly appears like you've got infinite choice, because suddenly everyone can do it, and you've got to wade your way through that. But you know, people like deadmau5 have managed to steer those waters in a clever enough way. And obviously, what he's made is good. It's good.
It has to be.
It's obviously good. I remember when I started at London Records in 1983. Even though they gave me a job and they loved what I did, I was never considered to be a proper A&R person, because that meant standing in Dingwalls or up in Manchester or somewhere, watching a band, not only liking the band but probably worrying about whether the audience liked the band as well. And with dance music, that never happened. Everything was like, someone came in with a tape. Did you like the tune? did you want to sign it? And then the business about whether anyone liked it came afterwards. But dance music's now finally starting to look a bit like rock and roll in the 70s and 80s, because Deadmau5 can play 3 nights at Brixton Academy. He didn't need a record deal.
Yeah.
Deadmau5 has actually done a record deal with EMI, but he didn't really need one. He's already, you know, through his own means, can actually headline a festival and play Brixton Academy for 3 nights.
Yeah.
Swedish House Mafia is a good example. They played Brixton, sold it out. 3 DJs playing half of their own music, half of other people's. They sold out Brixton Academy, and they're going to do another 3 or 4 this year. And they're headlining, you know, they headline the Ultra Fest in Miami, and they've just done a deal now. But they didn't need to do the record deal. The record deal was kind of the icing on the cake. And it's quite interesting that from a major label perspective now, if you wanted to get back into dance music, you can it's a much more tangible thing to kind of make a judgment on, because it's like, do I like it, and have they got an audience? And you can clearly see that these days they've got an audience.
And not necessarily in a club.
Not necessarily in the club. No, you can do it. You know, so things have changed radically. But by being empowered, the internet has allowed DJs to become empowered. The technology to be able to make records at home has allowed people to get empowered to the point they can get out there and start doing things for themselves, and the record company bit, if they ever need it, can come later. So interesting times.
But Deadmau5 was very emphatic that he's not a DJ, and he's sort of gone out of his way to say it, that he's a performer, he's a player.
You know, he's an artist. I always used to say, your first 15 minutes of fame kind of thing, be very careful about what the messages you send, because you will be forever condemned to either be a DJ or an act.
Yeah.
I'll give you a very good example, the Chemical Brothers. I mean, Tom and Ed were actually DJs, but nobody ever thinks of them like that. And they just did enough of the right things at the beginning to make sure that they, I mean, think back to it. Why do we not think of them as DJs? I mean, they clearly are DJs. They still DJ to this day, but people think of them as an act.
Yeah.
Whereas, you know, Carl Cox will always be a DJ. It doesn't matter what he does. He could record with the Philharmonic Orchestra.
Yeah.
And, you know, he will always be a DJ. So, you know, I remember the Propellerheads, actually. They did on Wall of Sound. You know, they had their moment, ended up doing a James Bond theme and everything like that. But they were DJs, but they were always perceived to be an act. Deadmau5 genuinely was a studio bod who made records in his studio, and then he went out and performed them. And even though he used technology that DJs do use, to be fair, you never seen him ever stand in front of a pair of turntables.
Yeah.
So for him, he makes these records that DJs play. And he has actually DJ'd in his own way, but he's definitely an act. He's definitely an act.
But is it the latest in the history of the DJ that starts with playing the records, then goes into remixing?
Well, I think in the old days when I started, you didn't have to make a record to be a big DJ back then. Now it's unthinkable. You couldn't conceive of being introduced as a DJ unless you made your own record. I mean, very, very, very rarest exception if you were some kind of turntable wizard that does it with his feet standing on his head.
Yeah.
People might just accept you as a DJ, but I couldn't really break through as a DJ. Doing what I did then, it wouldn't work now. I would have to. I mean, my career is happening upside down. I'm now making music almost to kind of reinvent myself and just make myself. Yeah, just because it works and it's fun. But I'm doing it. I'm making music after a long career at the other end of it, as opposed to now. If you start out, it's not even if you have to. I think it's just instinctive. You know, I've got a teenage son who wants to be a DJ, and going making music is absolutely hand in hand. It's like the music comes first. It's like, I've got an idea, I want to go and play. You know.
Can I ask you slightly about the ideological side of dance music and be a bit Marxist about it, if you like? You know, certainly after seeing something like Deadmau5 and the extraordinary passion that he incites in the whole kind of collective, which you say is it's like part of the social revolution, I guess. It's the soundtrack to that, which is quite interesting. Dance music always seems, there is a suggestion it's very much possibly about pacifying the masses, that you're constantly giving them parties, you're constantly giving them good times.
The one thing nobody said 10 years ago is we're all going to really, really still want to buy a ticket to a concert or to a rave or to a party or to a club. But that's 2010. 2010, you know, Deadmau5 can sell out 3 nights at Brixton. Swedish House Mafia can do 4 nights. You know, Tiesto can do Alexander Palace, wherever he's doing, Victoria Park. You know, Creamfields can sell out 65,000 tickets in Liverpool. The best clubs are still rammed, you know. and I think people still want to be with each other. You know, that's the thing. And, you know, I think it's a Marxist thing or not, but I think that thing of for all that kind of isolation in our lives, you know, the fact that everybody walks around London like this all the time, including me. But actually, we really want to be together.
But your commitment has always seemed so. You know, you've been very committed. You say you give your life to it, and therefore I'm interested in what you're giving your life to. When you say about these people all being together and they want to be together, what is it that you want to give them that makes it not just being?
Well,
that's something about it that's more interesting than them just being together, getting out of their heads.
You know, it's just a desire to do something well, really. It's not really that much deeper than that, you know. And DJing, I mean, there is an element of ego with DJing, without question. I still hold massive respect for people that do it well. It's still, I think it's actually still at large and underrated, even though it's become a thing everyone. You know, there's definitely been a period where everyone wants to be a DJ, and when you think of DJ Hero and things like that in the market now, but actually, mostly people are ignorant as to how difficult it is. So I have huge respect for as much for the next deadmau5 as I do actually for a great wedding DJ. You know, it is a bit of an addictive thing. I've always likened it to surfing. I've never actually surfed really, but I know one thing about surfing is if you catch the perfect wave, you spend the next 5 years trying to catch the next one. And I think it's a bit like DJing when you've done it for a long time. When you have those really magic moments, you spend it's frustrating. You want that again, and it doesn't. You could play the same records in the same order to the same people in the same room night after night after night, and it won't be the same. So you just want that, you know.
That's what interests me. That idea that sometimes you'll be playing things that are incredibly familiar to them, but something that you do manages to make them feel new.
Well, it's a million different elements that kind of have to come together in the right moment, and that's what's fascinating about it, I suppose. That's a big thing that keeps you going. It kills you, it winds you up. Most DJs I really know, and the ones that have been around for a long time, performing for a long time, would share that same feeling of like elation or frustration. You can't quite work out. Sometimes not, you know. A lot of the time it's you, and an awful lot of the time it's nothing to do with you. It could just be the mood. You imagine everybody's living their lives. They all come into the room. Different things, shit's happened that day, and you know that big record doesn't go off. You know.